Good morning. Today, we are talking about sustaining ourselves and the mission and creating cultures of wellness to not have a reactive response to burnout, but a proactive response to burnout in this field. And so excited to have everybody on here and to get to talk a little bit about this topic with our panelists, who I'm going to go ahead and introduce, starting with Dan. Dan Emmer, he's the founder and executive director of Worthwhile. He is a visionary leader with over 13 years of hands-on experience supporting survivors of human trafficking, both in India and in the US. With his global upbringing in Ukraine, he combined with a background in business, it uniquely positioned him to drive innovative solutions to one of today's society's most pressing issues. And under his leadership, Worthwhile has launched groundbreaking initiatives, forged partnerships with over 250 social service agencies, and reached more than 4,000 partnerships with over 250 social service agencies, and reached more than 4 million people in 2024 through national awareness campaigns and speaking engagements. So we love his program. We love the way that they operate. So we're grateful for you to be here, Dan, and spend a little bit of time talking on this subject as well.
Happy to be here. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
Dan spoke on something really similar at our attack conference last year, so we're glad to have him back. Secondly, we have Susan Muncie. Susan, she is an LCSW. She's also the founder of Generate Hope in San Diego, which is a nationally recognized leader in the fight against trafficking. I've been lucky enough to come and visit both of their San Diego locations. And with decades of experience supporting the long-term recovery of survivors, she's been honored as both a CNN hero, a L'Oreal Woman of Worth, and she has devoted her life to helping women who've experienced sex trafficking reclaim their lives with dignity, purpose, and hope. She's also currently authoring a book, and she serves as chair of the San Diego Regional Human Trafficking and Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children Advisory Council and vice chair of its survivor services subcommittees. So we're grateful to have you with us as well, Susan, and to hear about the things you guys have implemented at Generate Hope.
Pleasure to be here.
And last, of course, but not least, we have Miss Audrey Badke. She is a coach, a trainer, and a community organizer with over 20 years of experience. Her commitment to ending sex trafficking began when a close friend of hers was recruited by a pimp, which inspired her to co-found REST, a Seattle nonprofit offering outreach, advocacy, and 24/7 hotline behavioral health and housing services. She supported thousands of survivors and trained over 10,000 community members. But today, she partners with individuals and teams through her private consulting business to build confidence, communication, and resilience, all guided by her belief that everyone deserves love and freedom from exploitation. So thank you, Audrey, for being here as well.
Thank you.
I am going to just jump right in because I'm sure we're going to have questions and I want to make time for those as well. So a little disclaimer about those questions. If you have a question for one of our panelists, you do not need to leave it until the end. But what I do need you to do is put it in the Q&A portion on the bottom of this webinar, because if you put it in the chat, I am in here solo today. So I do not have a moderator monitoring the chat. And that will make sure that I get that question answer. And a reminder to our panelists, if you guys could mute and then unmute when you have something to say, so I know kind of my little signal of that is you're wanting to speak on this topic, that is really helpful as well. So my first question is about why does this matter? Like, why are we talking about this? What are your thoughts on this issue? And from your perspective as leaders in this field, why is it critical that our field and the related fields start talking more openly about burnout and sustainability, not just as a personal issue, but as something that affects survivor care and something that affects organizational health overall? Audrey, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to start us off?
I'll get us going early, strong, without any silence. Yeah, having done this work, what we know is that it is highly relational work. People who have experienced trafficking have experienced interpersonal trauma, and many of us doing this work, whether we've experienced trafficking or not, have also experienced interpersonal trauma. And the way that we heal from interpersonal trauma is, yes, through therapy, but it's largely through relationship. And so when we are working with an advocate, when we are working with a therapist, when we're moving into a safe home as survivors, then we are attaching to the people that we are engaging with. And the staff become those secure touch points for survivors to be able to dream and take risks. And when we have staff turnover, it directly affects the client outcomes because it disrupts that healing process. In fact, it can also reinforce no one's going to stay. No one's really cares about me. They're only caring about me because of money. And of course, none of us are getting into this work because of money. But when we have to change our career or change jobs because of burnout, because we can't create the life that is sustainable, then it has an effect on our clients because we also then don't have the capacity to be able to care for them the way we did when we were employed. And so, whether we are employers or employees, we need to all recognize the importance of caring for ourselves, caring for our organization, creating an organizational system that can sustain people for a long term. Because I do believe that it's possible to do this work for a duration of time. And when we can do that, then we create better outcomes for the people that we're serving because we can create that environment that heals not just through the programs that we offer, but through the greatest resource we offer, which is relationship.
Thank you, Audrey. Who wants to go next? I know you all have plenty to say. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Audrey. I love that just overarching view of, why this is an issue. I'm going to start with some things that we all know, and that is that we ask a lot from our staff. This is challenging work, and it weighs heavy on all of our hearts. Salaries are oftentimes not comparable with comparable work elsewhere in our city or state. The hours are often long. Staff can even sometimes feel isolated or unappreciated or feel like their work is not appreciated or meaningful. So I think if we want to retain staff and protect them from burnout, we have to create a culture, like you're talking about, Audrey, that people don't want to leave. That is a safe holding environment, is what I would say. And that bubbles down from our staff into the women that we serve. Whether we have it or don't, one way or the other, it's going to bubble down.
Yeah.
And I think that starts with servant leadership. Everything's going to start with leadership. I think that our leaders need to be serving with a humble heart, focused on the ministry. We need to model refinement, justice, and mercy within our staff and with the work that we do with the women. And we need to walk with integrity, with clarity of our mission. I think that the culture we want to form is trauma informed, clearly. And that goes within our staff and within our programs. Another thing that might be a little bit controversial is I think we need to resist a data-driven culture. I do know that we need data, especially, in the climate we're in right now, but it can't drive the culture. And to me, Jesus gives freely. He doesn't measure. And I think that this is a good model to follow. Again, we need the data, but it can't drive our programs. I think we also need to model healthy renewal and strive to rest. I just came off a sabbatical, and that was a long awaited blessing. But what we do, our staff is going to follow. So if they see us burning out, they're going to follow that and think that's the expectation. If they see us taking rest, which sometimes is really hard, I know, but it's something that we, have to model. And I think that we need to work that into our policies and procedures with things like vacation, mental health days, and, sabbaticals at whatever point. And finally, I think our compensation has to honor those who are serving alongside our residents or the survivors. And the compensation needs to also include things like, medical, dental, vision, mental health support's really important, and I think one of the things that I've seen some programs provide is like 5 free therapy sessions because people tend to not get started with therapy when it goes through their insurance. But if they have those free days, then that can take care of whatever the issue is, or it can transfer over to, what our insurance provides. And then just finally, adequate clinical supervision and training.
Yeah,
So that's a
supervision.
lot.
Yeah. And there's so much. I mean, that's why we could spend probably a 3-day conference really with any of our
Yes.
webinar topics, but this one as well. And
Yes.
you're both so far, I'll turn it over to you, Dan, in a second, but both of you so far have made me feel like, okay, well, I'm on the right path because this year we did a webinar on the power of relationship and community, right? And we
Uh-huh.
did a webinar on like leadership in the field. And so I feel like we're maybe building in on a path that we should be. But Dan, do you want to add?
Yeah, I first and foremost, I'm so excited because this is an important topic. I did have the opportunity to share last year. The topic title is called the Balancing Act. It's kind of striking that balance between good programming, good service, and longevity. And it is truly a balancing act because you want to do this well. And the reason why we do this is when we talk about those that we're serving and healing from trauma, a word that should be used to describe that is, and then a requirement of that is resilience. If you think of anything
Of
that
course.
is, takes commitment, it's resilience. And so if we're asking that of those we're serving to be resilient, or they're showing that resilience, we as well need to be resilient. And that doesn't mean just individually, which that's part of it, but it's also corporately. How do we as an organization do it? So I am excited about this because I have so many things I would like to share about tools, methods, approaches. I'm not going to share all that now because I'm sure you're gonna ask those great questions and then we'll fill that in. So I'm gonna leave that to you. But yeah, I'm excited for it because I feel like so many of us want to do this work. We have the heart for this work, but there are times as humans we are tired. And so this is the beauty of this work, is that we can come together, and what you're offering is the opportunity for us to learn from each other. And so I will share as much as I can. I'm the least qualified person to be here, but happy to share what I can, what we've learned over these last 13, 14 years. So
Yeah, that's so funny that you would say you're the least qualified person to be here. Well, I think all of you, your longevity in this field is evidence that it's possible, like Audrey was saying, to stay in this field long term. And I'm sure we all have had I would be surprised if anyone on this call said that they have gone all that time without having a season of burnout, right? I certainly have. And I think a lot of this we learn through trial and error and from the need in our own lives or in the lives of our staff. But I want to ask, and Dan, you're getting me, you're led us right into this. What's working? What strategies, whether they're personal strategies or leadership strategies or organizational strategies, what have you found that genuinely do help sustain people in this work and organizations?
I guess so I have an hour
Go
now,
for it.
right? I can just go
Yeah,
for it for an
yeah, the
hour.
full hour. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I'll just touch on a few things and then leave it for others, because one of the things Susan touched on right out of the gate was culture. That's something that when we have our staff retreats, because we have multiple departments, and our staff retreats for each department, we do what's called a SWOT analysis, looking at our strengths,
Hmm.
weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What I loved, we just had some a couple months ago, and I said to the teams, because we had 5 different teams meeting, and I said, it was so neat, and so I was so proud of you all. And this was unprompted. The strength that was shown across everyone is that they said our strongest suit is our culture, and that we feel that this is where we want to be, And I said, that's something to be proud of because not many organizations can say that. So how do we get to that culture, right? It doesn't just happen. It says, again, what was already shared, it's from the top down. Leadership, I think many on this call already have that mentality. It's like, we need to lead through our service and how we say, whatever I'm going to ask you to do, I'm willing to do myself. But more than that is having really strong structures and things in place to allow for that. So one of the things I often share about is that, having longevity, it requires having a solid foundation, right? If you're going to have a house that exists for a long time, its foundation needs to be sturdy. So how do you create a strong foundation? Well, I think a lot of that is accomplished through having core values. We often go back to our core values. Whenever a new hire is brought on, we have about 140 staff now. Every single person, here's our core values. And they say, okay, this is what they're built on. That allows that everybody to know where we're starting from as a foundation. And then I also think you have your corporate core values and mission statement. You also need to have your own personal core values and mission statement. Now I simplify mine down to 5 core values as well as a personal mission statement. It allows me to stay on track. It keeps my focus on mission and making sure that we don't deviate from that. So those are simple things that if you are an organization say, hey, we don't have core values. Maybe that's something we can put together. Happy to share ours. It could be a template. Happy to share, our mission statement, personal core values as well, because I think those are things that help as a foundational starting point. Now, I'm not going to go for an hour. I have many other things I'd love to share, but I'm going to pass it off to the others.
I'll
Go ahead,
jump in
Audrey.
there and say, as we have this conversation and we talk about what's working, I also want to make the acknowledgement that it's incredibly hard to find what works. What works changes based off of who you have there. And there have been seasons of time where we tried to make changes and we found so many different barriers, whether it was funding, whether it was candidates applying or applicants applying for different positions. There were so many challenges that I think we have to keep striving for health within our organizations. And I just want to acknowledge, even as we do so, that even the people that I think are absolute best at this run into the barriers and challenges. And so if you all are feeling that, I want you to know you're not alone. With that, I will say, I think one of the key things that Dan kind of spoke to, but I'll just emphasize, is being able to have a space where staff can talk about what's working within your own group. Because we had some gems that would come out where we ran 24-hour programs. It's hard to not burn out when you have 24-hour programs, because you have people with real needs reaching out all the time. And so being able to really look at, okay, what do we need to sustain people? There were seasons where we found our staff wanted to have 4-day work weeks so that they could have 3 days off. And 1 day could be just completely decompressing, and then 2 days to get done the personal things they needed to get done. We had different times where we tried having on-call staff and paying our on-call staff to be available to step in when we had somebody who called out. So then we knew that there would always be someone planning to be there as a backup and receive a small stipend for honoring their time to not go out with friends, not make other plans, but be available. And our staff came up with some really great ideas. And the key to it was asking the questions, asking our staff the questions, and collaboratively working together, making the space to be able to have the conversations, consider the options together, and find ways that we could say, we'd love to do that, but we can't for this reason or this reason. Or be able to say, yeah, that seems ridiculous, but let's try it and see if it works. And there were many times that things that we weren't sure would make a big difference would. Another one that people came up with was being able to have like a grace period of how long you would be there afterwards, recognizing like you were scheduled for an 8-hour shift, but you might end up working 9 hours, and planning for the 9 hours every time, knowing that there might be something during crossover that would need that attention, and being able to honor that and prepare for that, rather than have it be, I'm supposed to be off at 2:00 and that person isn't done yet, or we had to talk through this crisis, but instead knowing like, I'm going to get off between 2 and 3:00, and just setting that expectation, which is the second thing I'll just touch on briefly, which is what is working is having realistic expectations. And I think that also really feeds into the culture. Because when we think about burnout, part of the challenge is that there's more than we can possibly do. and we get done with our day and say, what did I even
Yeah.
accomplish? What was the
Yeah.
point of even doing any of this? And I'll just note whether a person has one client or 20 clients or 50 clients, it can consume everything that we do. And so
Mhm.
it's helpful to be able to sit with someone else and say, realistically, what can I do as I'm supporting this person today? What can I do while I'm on this shift in this safe house? And being able to be clear on maybe the best thing that I did today was show up and allow someone to know that I care about them. I might not help them get housing, I might not fix their situation, but they know that they're not alone. And maybe that's enough for today because that's actually all that I can accomplish in this time right now. And being able to have those expectations that match your bosses, or if you're the boss, making sure that your expectations for your staff are reasonable is critical, because when you're part of an organization, not only are you doing this for yourself, but you're going home and going, oh my gosh, is this person pleased with me today? Am I going to have a job tomorrow? Did I do what I was supposed to do? And it's critical to be able to name what the expectations are so that people can know where they stand as to whether or not they're meeting those.
That's so important. And I appreciate, Audrey, that you highlighted that a big part of this is in our organizational structures, in our staffing models, in the way that we operate every day, and not just in things that are maybe what we would traditionally think of as addressing burnout or wellness, right? Like self-care and stuff like that. So I appreciate that. Susan, do you want to add to this?
Yeah. I'm gonna drill down a little bit and bounce off of what Dan and Audrey have said. But I think that structure is so important, not just within, our organizational culture, but also in what we're providing and how we're providing those services. And I think having that guidance, we're really down to the nitty gritty. I've always said that the women have taught us. I've been doing this for 17 years, and every woman who comes through the program just about teaches us something that we are doing well and that they appreciate, or something that we could tweak and change a little bit. But, I'm talking about even down to things like, I don't like the name of this, but we have a three strikes you're out program. And so, for specific things that are disruptive to the program and to other women, people can get a verbal warning, a written warning, and a strike. And with three strikes, then we have to ask them to leave because it's, disruptive for the other women. And we never want to do that. And fortunately, we don't have to do that very often. But even in, verbal communication and write-ups, it can be a struggle, for the team. And, it can be that, they have a relationship with this person and it's difficult to put that support in place. And so, we need to be there for that guidance and the training. So making sure that our staff has good communication skills, boundaries, which can be a tough one because people come into this work with a heart for the work. And sometimes it's easy for your boundaries to get, pushed back. And if that's happening, then staff can get resentful, and we certainly don't want that. So those communication skills, the relationship skills, trauma-informed training, and the mindfulness I think you were talking about, Audrey. What can I do today? What can I do right now? What can I do with this survivor, in this hour? So again, it's a lot of modeling, guidance, support, structure that I think has to clearly be in place from day one for our staff. And I think those things also help with burnout because it helps us from heading down, paths that aren't healthy. So that's what I would add.
And Susan, you all created, is it a wellness committee? What is it?
Yes.
You all have something. Yeah. Can you just take like maybe 1 minute and talk about that piece?
Yeah. And I will say that it's hard to keep it going because everybody gets busy. And, do I have that hour to set aside this week for the wellness committee? And we have to, prioritize that. Yeah, yes, we need to make that time. Otherwise, it's going to be two months down the line and we haven't done anything for wellness for our staff. And those are things, to sometimes it's just something fun to do together as a staff outside of work, and those create the culture and the bonding experiences. Sometimes it's talking about approaching things differently. What do we need to do within our structure, within our policies and procedures to have a healthy environment? So yeah, that's kind of.
And that's staff that sit, right? If I remember
Yeah.
correctly, it's staff that sit on this wellness committee. And I think
Yes.
when I think about that, and I think of what it must be like to be a staff member, to know that you have allies in your own like efforts to care for yourself, and
Right.
that it's so visual by knowing that your organization prioritizes these meetings with a wellness committee, like that's part of building that culture, right? It's a very
Right.
visual part, a tangible piece of building that culture.
And we've even surveyed staff, so maybe there's four
Yeah,
people in that wellness committee, but we're getting input from the rest of the staff as well, because maybe we're
exactly.
missing something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when we're building these cultures, I think, historically, a lot of when we've talked about, I mean, I know in my early years in this field, when I would get interviewed by potential employers or by, to sit on boards or things, a lot of the conversation was like, how do you take care of yourself? Especially as a person with lived experience, right? When you step into a space, that's often what they're asking to see, like, are you in a place where you've experienced enough healing to serve, to pour out, right, and not need as much pouring in from an organization. And most definitely my responses in those things were usually about like, well, I go take a walk and I call my best friend, and all of these like self-care practices, right? Which are so important. And not to say that those things are not important. We do need those personal individual practices that help us decompress or fill us up so that we can do that pouring out. But how do we, as leaders in this field, because we have a lot of executive directors, a lot of program directors on this call, how do we move beyond kind of thinking about burnout from maybe the ways that we need to personally regulate ourselves and move into building cultures, which you guys have touched a lot about this, well, with wellness, boundaries, and state sustainabilities are part of what is woven from the beginning, like part of the DNA of that organization, and not just bolt-ons that come in to be reactive.
Great
Go
question.
ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think for one of the things that we, really excel at, I think, is having healthy kind of structure framework within the organization. And I stole it from my dad. You kind of mentioned it in my bio. I grew up in Ukraine. My dad started, in business, and then we became missionaries. And so he built this structure in this foreign land that he passed away 23 years ago. That ministry is now 30 some years old, still continuing. But the reason why is you build a framework within your team. Your team can then operate. It never should be around any individual, not even the CEO, executive director. So that's the first thing. It gives people that ability to run and operate. And then you also need to encourage your staff, like your directors, your managers, to make sure that they delegate, they give the responsibility to others, that they're not always the be all end all answering all things. You should never ever do that. You have to have that team lift mentality. And that's one of the things that's so important. And I think sometimes because we have a heart that wants to help, we often overextend ourselves. So utilizing that structure. And then if you're on the very top level, as far as like hiring and firing, this is one of the hardest things, but the most responsible things you can do as a leader. We need to take our time, do the very best we can to hire appropriately and hire well. But if you find you can't delegate to someone because you can't trust them, you need to then make a decision of letting them go. And you cannot let that linger. I've learned this the hard way, is that I wanted to train, I wanted to improve, and I tried and I tried and I tried. And I knew after like the second or third time it probably wasn't going to take, but I kept trying. And what it ended up doing is the other good team members got tired of it. And I lost good team members because of that. And so as leaders, we need to sometimes cut ties with or ask people, say, hey, I appreciate your heart. I know that you feel like you align with this mission, but it's just not a fit. As hard as that is, it's the best thing for your team. So we're oftentimes called to do those things that no one wants to do, but hire as best as you can, fire as quickly as you can. It's kind of that mentality so that you can keep the team growing healthy. And then one other thing too, I would just make a recommendation is that we try to come together with our teams, keeping together on mission. So we do a quarterly leadership breakfast. We actually had it this morning. We had about 17 of us there. And what we start with is, icebreakers, kind of build that community. Everyone's coming from different departments, but we always come back to mission. What is our mission? So they have to share two things. What did you do in the past 6 months or in the past previously before our last quarterly meeting since then to now? What have you done that has furthered the mission and the work that we're doing? And whether you're in the outreach department and engagement and marketing, whatever, it doesn't matter. You still have to say, this is how I furthered the mission. And then something Audrey touched on is that we get so caught up with all the things, right? In the day to day, it's important to also then say, what's a specific thing I can do? What's a goal I can do to help move the mission forward? And so I have all the team leaders state those things. And so that ties them back to mission. Why are we doing this to begin with? Not for the money, not for the fame. We're doing it for the mission of what we're called to do. And then one other way to help solidify that, and I do this with my directors, and again, I put it on me, is I'll try and find something that we should talk about to help improve us as leaders. So there's a book that actually I heard 2 or 3 years ago at your conference at Attack. It was called Trusted Leader, 8 Pillars That Drive Results. It's an easy read. It's kind of just walks through different leadership mentalities. I'll share it in the chat when I'm done yapping here. But I read it. I was like, this is good. And then I asked my director, said, please read it. One of my directors was like, I don't read. I'm like, I know. Find it on audiobook, whatever you need to do.
Just to do it, yeah.
Yeah. And then we sat down and we talked about it. Every single person said, I got something good out of this. And then that whole idea of like,
Yeah.
what is that one thing you're going to choose to further the mission? That came out of that reading. We said, what are 1 or 2 things we can do at all of our leadership meetings? So try and find things that you can help your leaders grow. And that's another way to do it as well, through, as in our role, to try and find things that will improve. And then we do it with them and talk about it and then implement.
Yeah, we love Trusted Leader. I mean, we did a very similar thing. We still use it in our quarterly reviews. In our quarterly reviews, we review our leadership and we review it against those 8 pillars. Like how are our leaders, holding? And I think that accountability is a great part in preventing burnout too, right? When we have a safe place for feedback, and feedback isn't one of the things that's making us feel exhausted about this work, because we've created a safe space within our staff culture that can be really helpful as well. Susan, you've unmuted. Take us away.
I just wanted to say I love that balance that you're striking, Dan, between having that structure in place, which is so important for us, but also being open to learning new things. Constantly be looking, for things that can help us as a leader and, and our team in their work. And because this work is constantly changing, and I mean, just to mention one thing, it seems like the acuity level of the women we serve has become greater over the years, and so it means we need to learn new things but maintain that same structure, the mission, the values, and so on. So yeah, I just wanted to second that, Dan.
Go ahead, Audrey.
So in full disclosure, I don't remember the original question, but I'm going to go off of some of the things shared.
It? Oh,
no, because I've got something else to say, which is
perfect.
I really appreciate, Dan, what you were saying about this concept of hire slow and fire fast. And one of the things I'll just note is that there are 2 challenges I see that make this incredibly difficult in the anti-trafficking field. One is that we are serving survivors. And so we are already very person-centered. We are already really wanting to care for the person there. And sometimes we want to treat our employees the way that we treat our clients, with the same unconditional care, the same endurance, the same belief that with enough support, there can be success. And it can be a challenge because sometimes staff are survivors. And so there is this balance of being able to really care for our employees well, even through a firing process, and recognize that our employees are hired to care for our survivors. And if our employees are not doing their job, then they're not accomplishing the mission. And so being able to hold those, and one of the things that I find to be absolutely critical, and I will say sometimes I did this with success, sometimes I did not, is being able to have clear communication and being able to say, this is working, this is not working. This is what needs to change. It needs to change by this date. What do you need to be able to make those changes? What support can we give? And what support do you need that's outside of what an employer should give? I found it helpful at different times to sit with employees and draw a Venn diagram, the two circles with the overlap, and look at what are the things that are the employee responsibilities, what are the things that are the employer responsibilities, and what are our shared responsibilities, and make sure that we have clarity on what that is, so that as we're sitting with an employee, they don't have unrealistic expectations of me, and I don't have unrealistic expectations of them. And y'all, I've been on both ends of it, right? With my boss too.
Yep.
I'm not thinking she needs to do more than what she needs to do. But being able to have that clarity can absolutely help. I also find it's really easy for us to say, this person isn't a right fit, or they aren't doing well. But we need to come up with the concrete examples as to why. And be able to sit with that person then, and to be able to say, I've noticed these behaviors. I've noticed these things have happened, and they don't work for this reason, and this is what's being expected instead. And being able to list that out helps it to not be personal, like you're doing a terrible job, but being able to say, hey, I've noticed these patterns, or I've noticed this behavior, and I'm concerned about it for these reasons. So clarity is kindness. And as we want to care for the person, whether it's our beneficiaries or our employees, being able to give that clarity allows us to take that action faster, which is critical. The other thing I'll say is that when you fire an employee, you then have double the work for everyone else there. And that can be incredibly hard because this work is already difficult, and many times we're doing multiple jobs. But I'll also say, to Dan's point, like you had mentioned, oftentimes people are already doing double the work, and maybe actually triple or quadruple when you have someone that's not fulfilling their job responsibilities. Because if they are causing more harm, more difficulty, then everyone else is not only doing their job, but cleaning up after it too. And so being able to recognize that effect can help to make it a little easier to take action. And then the other thing that, again, sometimes we did with success and sometimes not, is being able to have people ready to step into additional responsibilities. And one way we did that was by having some on-call folks that would be open to working part-time, or some part-time folks that would be open to working full-time, or having some volunteers that would be ready to step in a little bit more. And sometimes we'd call this the bench. Like, who do we have that's on the bench that is comfortable with our culture, knows our culture, but could step in a little bit more? The other thing is we can't always have that. So then we have one position that's unfilled and everyone else doing their positions plus a little bit more. And again, the clarity is kindness, is the belief that I hold, because if we can talk about, I know you're doing this, and I'm also asking you to do this. Or sometimes we need to talk to say, you're doing these things, but you don't have to. You've chosen to take on more work than what you need to do. Because when we don't talk about responsibilities and we don't talk about where a person's role begins and ends, you'll have some people that will naturally step in and go above and beyond. And you'll have some people that don't step up at all. But being able to have those conversations will help to bring that clarity, which again sets those expectations, and realistic expectations prevent burnout.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. Let's just have Audrey lead the rest of the webinar today. Susan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think this is kind of adding, and also, on the other side of the spectrum. And I've just noticed that Pamela was talking about workplace trauma. and her
Mm,
struggle to not find that good workplace culture that we've been talking about. And I
yeah.
think just in response to that, but also talking about working with staff, I think having the ability or having policies in place where we process things, that communication that you're talking about, Audrey, is so important. And so, and I don't mean processing somebody being fired because you can't do that, but processing things as we're going along the way. And even, processing a difficult interaction with a survivor or something that happened in the house, there was a fight, whatever, it took a lot of energy, people are upset and worried. Do we kick this person out? Do we, work with them? Having that processing time. And I think it's important for leaders, depending on the incident, to be involved in this so that staff knows that leaders are on the same page, that they're also within that structure, that they care as well about those things. So that person that becomes a problem employee, maybe it's coming from something that hasn't been processed or things that have not been processed. And I think that, having the processing incidents, good supervision in place, timely, and the training can help alleviate some of this, not all of it. There are people that just are not matched for whatever your workplace culture is. But I think these things, Pamela, can add to creating that workplace culture so that it kind of, we're all on the same team. We're all going for the same thing. I'm not fighting what you're doing. This team is not better than that team or more, advanced or important, but even down to being sure that that we've got good feedback from, and I'm talking about residential, so that those residential guides, that sometimes get overlooked and they're taking the hits, that they have just as much input and are seen as just as important as, somebody who has a degree or whatever. So bottom line,
Yeah.
back to that communication.
Supervision, processing, like those are really essential things to put in this work to reduce burnout. I'm coming from a background in youth services specifically, right? We see a huge rate of, like, youth will disappear, clients just disappear, and you don't know what happened to them. And maybe you were their core support person at one point in their life, or they return to harm, or you end up, hearing about an assault that they experienced. This is, really, really heavy work with clients, regardless of whether you're in residential or community-based services, is often just as heavy, if not more, right? Because people are actively sometimes in exploitation when you're working with them in community-based services, right? And without those places to process, I mean, I'll tell you, I do a lot of consultancy work outside of my 40-hour work with mentorship and working one-on-one with individuals. And if I didn't have my people to process, I would not be able to do that anymore. I would not be able to ever see a client ever again if I didn't have those things. And, we've seen great Kathleen, who is my supervisor, who you all know on this call. She opened an organization, or opened a program called the Lampstand in Virginia. And one thing that they did was restorative circles when they would have an elopement, when a youth would run away, right? To process that loss and that worry, and you have all of this care for that person, and now they're not in a safe space. And how do you just go back to your job, right? And your responsibilities to the other youth that are in there. So I love the bringing up supervision and processing as well. Audrey, did you want to add something else before we transition?
I do, because just as you described that feeling of having, I mean, honestly, right? People that we've cared for dearly go missing, and how
Yeah.
destabilizing that is. And then we can add to it, sometimes there are employees who just aren't with the organization anymore, and you don't know why. And it creates this very traumatic culture that's hard to be in. And I do think as leaders, we can create processes that honor confidentiality, but also gives space to process. And so thinking through the hiring, firing, I think are critical places of, or even just transitioning. How do we do this in a
Absolutely.
way that creates some stability for all of the staff that are there, that honors the confidentiality of the people that are involved, but also brings honor to people, whether they're starting, whether they're ending, and for whatever reason. And so, again, maybe one of the overall pieces to look at is where are the pain points within an organization? And I can guarantee onboarding and offboarding are probably two of the key ones. And then how do you create some processes around it that may not be able to take away the pain of it, but are able to bring some clarity and some places to be able to come together and support one another through it?
Yeah, absolutely. Susan?
Yeah, I know you want to transition, but that
That's
just brought
okay.
a couple of things to mind for
Yeah.
me. And that is when somebody is gone, I said, well, you can't talk about somebody being fired, but or let's say somebody that's struck out. But I think that addressing it, in the way that you can is so important. And so, sometimes I would have a conversation with the other residents, and it might be something like, I recognize so and so, is not here. You, of course, recognize that. And I know it's difficult and challenging when the balance changes, when someone comes in or somebody, leaves. But I want you to know that we always follow the structure that we set out. And our heart is to graduate women, and to have women move on to lead wonderful lives. Sometimes that doesn't always work. And we can't, of course, can't talk about what's going on for that person, but I want to acknowledge that this is difficult for you. And the other thing that came to mind was restorative justice. And so that we have those circles also with staff and the residents when there's a big issue. And or maybe something that's a medium issue, but everybody comes together and everyone is on an equal plane. Everyone gets to speak. It's very structured in the way it works. And, there's something that's passed to whoever's speaking and then passed, to the next person. We come together as a group and agree on what is it that we need to work on here, so that it's not just staff saying, okay, guys, come on in, we have something we need to talk about. And we find that they work very, very well. So just want to throw that in.
Yeah. Thank you. And I want to make sure that we have some time for some Q&A and some questions that are probably going to be applicable across the board. And one of those is around feedback. So what about, we have an individual who's in a workplace where there isn't, anonymous feedback venues. How would you all suggest, I guess, what kind of feedback options from staff would you all encourage? What have you seen to be helpful in sustaining staff and reducing burnout when it comes to feedback and accountability?
I'll get this
Go
started
ahead,
and I'll
Audrey.
be brief.
Yep.
I think giving a structure as to how to give feedback is helpful. So I personally think that if staff need an anonymous place to give feedback, which I do think the option is helpful, then we've missed the point that we haven't created a safe place to give honest feedback.
Agreed.
And as leaders, what we need is to help people to give that feedback. And what's most helpful is share the facts, what happened, share the impact, how it affected you, how it affected the community, and share the solution that you're looking for. And then once somebody shares that, then as a leader, it's helpful for me to either explain, well, first of all, to validate it, no matter what it is, because the fact that they shared it is a gift to us. Feedback is always a gift, so always validate. And then be able to say, these are the reasons why we can't do these things. So to share the context so that they can understand why that's not possible. Or be able to say, let me look into this more so that we can get the context or explore if it's possible. And I find that a lot of times when leaders hear feedback, our instinct is to become defensive. Our instinct is to think that it's not possible. And we don't always recognize the gift that the feedback is. And part of that can be because of the way the feedback is communicated, or it could be because of what the feedback is. But being able to say, give me a moment to think on this, let me get back to you, and actually consider it, actually consider the possibility around it. And if it's not possible, being able to explain why can help to encourage people to give further feedback in the future.
I think those
Thank you, Audrey. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think those are great. I think you kind of hit on it, Audrey, with like if we have an environment where, and this kind of goes to culture where there isn't a fear of giving feedback. Now there also is the desire for anonymity, and that can be done through different modules that are ways we can do that through filling out forms. But the idea is that we want them to be able to share and understand that we're all accessible and we all want to improve in what we do. And so allowing for that is crucial. So we have opportunities for our staff to give feedback. They have annual reviews for set goals, things like that. But more so when we're working with individuals, we want them to hear from us what we need to work on, and we want to hear from them what they need to work on. But one of the main things I always say is whenever they share with me, and kind of Audrey already said this, is I heard your story, and every single time, we without doubt, before we make any decisions, we're going to hear the other side of the story because there's always two sides. And so that's been something like it is just like it's just natural. This is what I want to do. They unload. I'm like, okay, I appreciate that. I hear you. I want to get, we also want to get the other side. We want to hear both sides, and then we will come to a decision or, before we move anywhere. Because sometimes and this is something I'm sure we all have experience with volunteers. We love our volunteers, but they hear a side of the story and they're off and running. You're like, no, no, no. Did you hear the other side of the story? And so like that's just something we need to encourage across the board is like we want to hear you, but we want to hear all of the story as much as we can. It helps us have an informed response as opposed to just reacting. And so that's a helpful thing for them to see and to model so that they're like, oh, okay, we just don't react when we hear something. We process with, hear from, and then come back together for resolution. So that's just one other thing that we try to put in place when we do that.
Right. And story doesn't necessarily mean like two people in conflict, right? It can be needs. It can be like all sorts of different things. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, and I think that one thing to always keep in mind is remaining curious. Whether that's a one-on-one interaction or it's with the team or, with a group of residents, is remaining curious. And if you have that curiosity embedded in your interactions, in your supervision, then people feel that they can come forward with things. So even starting, supervision with, what are your thoughts about the last couple of weeks since we met? Do you have any, ways that you feel like we could improve? What's going well? What do you need help with? And so giving some of those, questions to invite that feedback in. And just, of course, gauging that with who you're working with and how things are going.
Yeah. We're at the last couple of minutes here. So what I'm going to do is we have some great, like, people need leadership support. That is one thing I am learning in this field is that as leaders, we need support. And the questions are definitely supporting that idea that, man, as leadership, we need support. We need to run by how do we do this balancing act of keeping the people that we serve as our number one priority, because they absolutely are. And I think as a survivor, as somebody with lived experience, that's something that when I'm mentoring upcoming survivor leaders, I'm really passionate about. That'll be my podium that I'll die on, is like, we as survivor leaders, as people with lived experience, are not the target demographic of most organizations. And we are not who organizations need to prioritize as much as we need to be included in order to support the people that they serve. Our primary as service providers, our primary people that we support are the people who are still actively needing our care based on our organizational mission statements, right? And we include people with lived experience in that. Anyway, try to remember what I was going to say there. But as we are prioritizing our clients, that means that we care for our staff, because as Audrey kicked us off in the very beginning, keeping great people who are equipped, who have a heart for the people that we serve, who have the experience to do it well, who know how to kind of live and exist in these cultures that are safe spaces as staff, that benefits the people that we serve. And so as we're doing these kind of balancing acts, what I want to do is I want to pull all of our questions from the Q&A, send it over to our panelists, see if they have any input on any of the questions that they can email back to me. And I will include any of those answered questions in the post-webinar email that I'm going to send out. Maybe next week, just because it's Thanksgiving and everything is wild. It may be the week after Thanksgiving, but there's nothing else that you need to do to receive this recording, to receive those questions, and to receive any additional materials that our panelists may want you to have. The other thing that I'm going to include on there is Safe House Project wrote a white paper on this topic that I sent out earlier this week, but that I will resend out in case you missed it, on burnout and sustainability in this field as well. So I'm going to attach that to that email. I thank you guys for prioritizing this. I know there's a lot of executive directors, a lot of leadership, and just a lot of people who are looking to know how to do this in their own lives and in organizations that they're building on this call. So I thank you for prioritizing this conversation. Shameless plug for our ATTACK conference in March. We'll continue having conversations like this, that it is for leadership. It is to kind of talk about how do we build cultures, how do we build movements and organizations that outlast us, all of the things that Dan said. And thank you to Dan, Audrey, and Susan for sharing your time and space with us. And Dan, I see you unmuted. Do you have something you want to say before we jump off?
I just was going to give you guys a plug as well, because I've been to a lot of conferences and you guys really shine as focused on developing things that leaders want to hear. Because you go to a lot of conferences and it's like, I've heard that, but then this was really good. So I'm excited for that. I'll be speaking on, beyond services and Safe House. So thinking about creative ways that we can serve survivors beyond, so outside the box thinking. And I just really commend you guys for pulling this stuff together, because this is what leadership needs to hear and needs to work on.
Thank you. Thank you. We're excited to have you. And if you're a person with lived experience, fill out our survivor scholarship form for the conference as well. If you're a leader with lived experience, we'd love to have you. And I am just really grateful for you all being here. Have a restful day, and I will see you all with our webinar series in January.